All right, Kevin Call, PM Head of Cloud Management Solutions here at Supermicro, continuing our podcast on importing a Kubernetes cluster into our developer console. So we had created this compute cluster, in the previous video where we deployed three nodes as part of the cluster. Compute 4, Compute 5, and Compute 6. Compute 4 was identified as the master node, and 5 and 6 were the compute nodes. And so we need to log into that Compute 4 node and take a look at what certificates were generated. And I'll show you that in a few moments. But I just wanted to navigate here and talk about logging in, right? So let's log out here for a moment here and log back in. And we're going to use admin, lowercase admin, and the password is going to be password. Password is PASSWORD, and it is lowercase. That is the default password to come in when you initially deploy the developer console. I would recommend you change it for security reasons. So make sure you're set for local because you have a drop down here for LDAP when you initially set up your LDAP users to log in. So let's start by looking at one thing you want to make sure of is your license detail. And the license detail of licenses you get is from your Supermicro personnel. They will provide you with this license for you to turn on and activate the software before you start digging into the configuration. All right, let's get to the cluster. Time to import. So I talked about this control plane before, this master node, which is Compute 4. And so in that generation, when we generated KubeSpray, we had essentially certificates that were initiated, right? There were certificates called client server data certificate, client key data certificate, and if we scroll up here, the certificate authority data. These are going to be used as imports into when we import the cluster, right? And we'll show you that in a couple of minutes when we get down the mechanics of importing that into our environment. So let's move this over to the other side for a moment and let's start our import. So the first thing it's going to ask you is the cluster name. So let's put in our south cluster is what we're going to call it. And the control node in this case is going to be the compute 4 node, which we identified as 172.24.199.158 with the 6443 port. So this is where we actually initiated our Ansible playbook from this particular node. It went out and loaded all the other software bits to the other essentially cube nodes that were in our environment. So our certificate was generated. We're going to use a private as a vendor, and then we're going to start plugging in our certificate keys here. So the first thing is we want to look at the CA certificate. And so the CA certificate is the client, the certificate authority, which is going to be this key right here that we're going to cut and paste. So we're going to take this entire key here and essentially cut and paste that into this location. So we're going to paste it in there. And then we're going to go down to the client server. Let's go back to client server again here. So the client server is this one. So we're going to cut and paste this information. Oops, I moved the wrong one here. Let's just move this one back here. We're going to cut and paste it in there. And the last one is the client key. And the client key is the last one here. what we're going to cut and paste. Let me just move it over here so I can make sure I cut the entire contents of that client key data over. And we're going to paste it in there. And then we're going to change our endpoint to node. And you can change this one to either Habani or Gaudi. In this case, we're doing NVIDIA.com GPUs. We'll say next here. And then it'll just prompt you to essentially import it. So we say submit here. And the cluster has been created. So let's look at the cluster, right? So we can look at the hosts that are here. They're all up and operational. You can see they're basically imported with the appropriate cores in memory. So the cluster is now imported, and now we can start building on each of these particular nodes, serving up the disks. So you want to make sure that Compute 4, Compute 5, and Compute 6 have NFS common. So we do an app install NFS common on each of these, which will be NFS clients. They will point back to our NFS server, which is our backhaul storage. And then we can get into the mechanics of creating virtual machines and instantiating containers. So this completes this particular video clip on importing the cluster. We now have successfully imported a compute cluster into this south cluster, or this shard, this developer console control plane shard one. We have east and west to do. Let's go over to north, and I'll show you the north one, which we've already done here. So north is going to have the north cluster itself. And you can see here Kubernetes compute 0, 1, 2, and 3 are there. They're up and operational with the appropriate CPU cores in memory. So that completes this video clip. Thanks for joining today. You have a great day, and we'll see you across the aisle.